The game begins with the move pawn to e4, which is the most popular opening choice for white. In response, you can choose to play the French defense. Even if you have never played the French defense before, do not worry. We are not going to dive into the complex mainline variations that require deep theoretical knowledge. Instead, I will show you a simple and reliable system that you can use against nearly any setup white plays. Let's begin. After pawn to d4, you respond with pawn to d5, directly challenging the center and attacking the pawn on e4. Because of this, white must decide how to defend that pawn. There are mainly two important options you need to know. White may defend the pawn with knight to c3. Sometimes white plays knight to d2, but for our system, it does not make a difference. The other main option is the advance variation, where white pushes pawn to e5, gaining space in the center. There is also a third, less common choice, the exchange variation, where white captures on d5. However, this is not dangerous for black at all, since it leads to a completely symmetrical position. After the exchange, you simply develop your pieces normally, castle your king safely, and enjoy a solid and equal game without needing to memorize complicated theory. Now, let's return to the main position and continue with the principal line after knight to c3. In traditional French defense theory, the main variations usually involve moves like bishop to b4 or knight to f6, which can lead to very complex and heavily analyzed positions. However, instead of diving into those complicated lines, we are going to simplify our approach by going for an exchange-style setup. Here, we play pawn takes on e4, and after knight takes on e4, we immediately focus on solving the main problem that black faces in the French defense, the development of the light-squared bishop on c8. Because of the pawn structure, especially the pawn on e6, this bishop often becomes trapped on its original square and struggles to find an active role. To fix this issue right away, we play bishop to d7, preparing to reposition it along the long diagonal. Soon, we will bring the bishop to c6, where it becomes an active and powerful piece, putting pressure on the center and queen side. This setup has several advantages. This setup is a solid and reliable choice, played even by top grandmasters like Kasparov and Carlsen, yet it remains less explored, giving you a surprise factor against most opponents. It's also simple to play, as you can follow the same plan in nearly every position. Usually, white develops with knight to f3, and you complete your bishop maneuver with bishop to c6, attacking the knight on e4. If white defends, you prepare to bring in more pressure by first playing knight to d7, getting ready for knight to f6 on the next move, improving your development and central control. You might be wondering, why not play knight to f6 immediately? Well, let me show you a tricky line that explains why we avoid that. At first glance, knight to f6 looks perfectly logical. It develops a piece and attacks the knight on e4. However, there's a hidden tactical drawback. After white captures on f6 and you recapture, you're forced to bring your queen out early if you want to avoid damaging your pawn structure. Once your queen is exposed, bishop to g5 follows, pinning and attacking it, and suddenly your queen is in trouble. This demonstrates why it's generally not recommended to develop your queen too early, as it can easily become a target for your opponent's attacks. There's also a humorous little sideline here. It may seem that black can strike back with bishop takes on f3, appearing to win material. But then white plays the unexpected queen to d2, calmly ignoring the threat to their bishop. Instead, they go after your queen, which is now actually trapped and will soon be captured. It's a fun variation to know, but this is exactly why we don't rush knight to f6. Instead, we prepare it first by playing knight to d7, keeping our position safe and coordinated. After playing knight to d7, you are now fully prepared to develop your other knight safely. On the next move, you can play knight to f6 without any problems. Whatever move white chooses, you continue with knight to f6, attacking the knight on e4. Now white must respond. If white captures on f6, you simply recapture with your other knight, keeping your position solid and avoiding any need to expose your queen. If white retreats the knight, that's perfectly fine. It only moves to a more passive square, giving you greater control of the center. If white tries bishop to g5, pinning your knight, that's no issue either. You calmly play bishop to e7, neutralizing the pin and continuing your development smoothly. Notice how these moves form a clear and consistent plan. You follow the same structure no matter what white plays. After bishop to e7, your attack on the knight on e4 is renewed, and white often chooses to exchange on f6. After knight takes f6, you recapture and reach a rock-solid position. One key point to note here is the pawn on d4. Because your light-squared bishop can exchange its defender at any time, the d4 pawn can become a potential weakness. It's not immediately lost, but in some variations, for example, If white tries to play aggressively with knight to e5, that pawn may eventually come under serious pressure or even be captured. In this position, if white jumps in with knight to e5 too early, you can actually go ahead and capture the pawn on d4, taking advantage of the weakened center. Because of that, white usually avoids this immediate move. Instead, white often decides to defend the d4 pawn with pawn to c3, preparing to play knight to e5 on the next move. While this is not a serious problem for black, it can become slightly uncomfortable, as the knight on e5 will occupy a strong central square and may soon target your bishop on c6. To prevent that, as soon as you see your opponent preparing this jump, it's best to trade off your light-squared bishop right away. In the French defense, this bishop is often considered your bad bishop, since it's usually blocked by your own pawns, so you don't lose much by exchanging it. After you capture on f3, white recaptures with queen takes on f3, which immediately puts pressure on your pawn on b7. To defend against that and strengthen your structure, you play pawn to c6. This move not only protects your queenside, but also follows the classic principle taught by Capablanca. If you trade your light-squared bishop, place your pawns on light squares. By doing this, you give your dark-squared bishop plenty of open diagonals and freedom to operate, turning a small positional trade-off into a long-term strategic advantage. At first glance, it may look like white has the more active position and the advantage of having two bishops, but in reality, it's very hard for white to make progress. Your central pawns give you a rock-solid structure, leaving white with few good attacking plans. You also have a strong outpost on d5 for your knight or even your queen. For example, after almost any move by white, you can calmly play knight to d5, where it sits powerfully in the center. This often invites exchanges that simplify the position and lead to complete equality. Alternatively, placing your queen on d5 also works beautifully. It becomes an active, central piece attacking key squares. If white trades, the position remains balanced and solid. Overall, white's attempts to play aggressively often backfire, since your setup is so stable that their active moves usually end up creating weaknesses for you to exploit. For example, in this position, white might try to avoid exchanging queens, especially since your queen is attacking the bishop on g5. To keep the queens on the board, white may play queen to g3. Here's an entertaining and instructive variation. Not one you need to memorize, but it nicely shows the kind of tactical possibilities that can appear in this setup. In this line, you can suddenly strike with knight to h5, which simultaneously attacks white's queen on g3 and reveals an attack on the bishop on g5. This surprising move puts white in immediate trouble, as both pieces come under fire at once. If white tries to counter creatively with queen to e5, you calmly capture the bishop on g5. In response, white may try to recover the lost material with trading queen and play rook to e5, creating an X-ray attack against both your knight and bishop. After you make a defensive move, white might add more pressure by advancing pawn to h4, threatening to trap or exchange one of your pieces. At this point, black faces an interesting tactical challenge. If the bishop moves, white can capture the knight and restore material balance. But if the bishop stays, it will be captured next. In this position, white plays bishop to f6. If white respond by capturing the knight on h5 with the rook, black can play pawn to g6 on the next move. Now the rook is completely trapped. This sequence leaves black with a decisive advantage and a winning position.